session. This webinar is co-hosted by SaskOrganics, Organic Alberta, and Manitoba Organics. And there were a few other Q&A sessions happening around the country for the standards review, all providing excellent and thorough information on the standards review process and some of the major changes. We wanted to host one too with a bit more of a prairie focus, highlighting just some of the major changes that may affect prairie producers if approved. So we're going to start, just give me a second. So this is some of the content that we're going to cover over the course of this webinar. And we're going to start with some introductions. So my name's Deb Tusheld. I'm the Executive Director of SaskOrganics. We have Tracy Smith, Executive Director of Organic Alberta.
Hi there.
And Marika Duer-Naroski, Executive Director of Manitoba Organics.
Hello.
And then we're pleased to have others with us today that are intimately involved with the organic standards revision process and are going to guide us through some of the sections this morning, as well as be present to answer some questions at the end of the webinar during our Q&A session. So Nicole Boudreau is the director of the Organic Federation of Canada, or OFC, and the OFC leads the review every 5 years, which is a massive undertaking. Welcome, Nicole. Thank you for being with us here today. Next, we have Alison Squires. Alison's an organic farmer in Wood Mountain, Saskatchewan, and is also very involved with the Organic Standards Review. She is an elected member of the Organic Standards Interpretation Committee, and Alison's going to guide us through some of the major changes to crops and livestock this morning. So, hi, Alison. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Deb.
And next we have Janine Gibson. Janine's the OFC board representative for Manitoba. She's an organic inspector, and she's a voting member of the Technical Committee on Organic Agriculture. Janine's going to guide us through some of the major changes to the permitted substance list. So welcome, Janine. Thanks for being with us here this morning.
Thank you.
And we also have Martin Meinert. Martin is the organic farmer in Swift Current, Saskatchewan. He's a SaskOrganics director, and he was also a voting member on the Technical Committee of Organic Agriculture as well. So Martin's going to be around to help answer any questions during the Q&A. Good morning, Martin. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
And we have Jim Robbins here. Jim is an organic farmer in Delisle, Saskatchewan, and he's the OFC president and the Saskatchewan representation on the board of OFC. And Jim has been involved with the standards revisions for years in his capacity as president. And Jim is also going to be available to help answer any questions during the Q&A this morning. So good morning, Jim. Thanks for being here. Okay, thank you to all of you for the work that you do for the Organic Standards Review process and OFC, and for being with us here today. I'm going to turn it over to Marika now.
Okay, so as we jump in, we wanted to give some background as to what the standard review is and when we're doing this. So the Canada Organic Standards have to be reviewed every 5 years, and the review gives us an opportunity to incorporate the best practices into the standards, update them with results from research and experimentation by organic operators and the latest science, but also time to compare our standards to the organic standards of international market partners for trade equivalency. The beginning of this review began the summer of 2023 with an original call for modifications to the standards. At that time, producers, stakeholders, industry, scientists, and experts were all invited to take part in the process, and it was circulated widely to organic stakeholders across the country. At that time, 269 modification requests were made. Next, there was a call for members into a working group and technical committees, WG and TCs. Any person who wished to join a working group or a TC was invited to complete a brief application from describing their expertise and experience with the Canada's organic industry. It's really important that we have a wide variety of perspectives and voices for these groups so that we can get an encompassed view of what's going on in the industry. Once the working groups and technical committees were formed, each one covered a specific section of the standard. So no one group covered the entire standard. The participants included farmers, inspectors, researchers, representatives from industry associations, and more. You can find actually the list of all the members on each working group and technical committee on the OFC website. Together, these groups held 175 meetings, which accounted to hundreds of hours of work to develop the recommendations for the voting members of the Technical Committee for Organic Agriculture. The members of the TC heard 300 recommendations from those working groups. The decision on whether to accept, reject, or modify the proposed change to the standard was based on the following criteria. Does the change reflect organic principles as published in IFO? Does it incorporate the most up-to-date research? Will it change our relationship with potential trading partners? Is it realistic in terms of feasibility for our farmers and our processors? And is the proposed text clear and easy to understand? So now, after these discussions of working groups and the meetings of the technical committees, a draft for the new standard has been produced. And we're now in a public comment period, which was launched on May 30th and will remain open until July 29th. During this period, we have surveys and meetings like today to collect feedback from industry stakeholders, including our farmers, on how the impact of these changes will be, and collect comments that might not have been considered during these meetings. So it should be noted that the proposed amendments were generally aimed at improving the sustainability of organic production, improving our soil health, and improving animal welfare. And in many cases, just providing more clarity around the wording and how we phrase the standard itself. So with that, I will pass it to Tracy to talk a little bit more.
So this is the final comment period, and this is an opportunity for all of us, producers, processors, certifiers, researchers, consumers, to comment on the proposed changes to the standards. And to help us understand the proposed changes to the Canadian Organic Standard, OFC has prepared 2 guides. And so we'll show them to you on the OFC website right now. I think Deb will bring them up. So you can view all the documents they prepared as well as the draft organic standard on their website. The most important guides here are the general principles, and the other is on the permitted substances list. Both present the proposed changes clause by clause. Deb, are you able to share the screen? And both, what's that?
The screen is being shared.
Oh, I can't
We're
see
seeing it now.
Interesting. I cannot. Okay, I'll just carry on then. So the 2 guides that we're most interested in here is one on the general principles and the other is on the permitted substances list. And both of these guides present the proposed changes clause by clause. You can also view the draft edited standards and the permitted substances documents themselves. So in this webinar, we're only going to summarize the changes and the rationale behind the changes, rather than going through all the edits word for word, just for purposes of time. And so this means that it's important for everybody to review all the documents themselves as well, outside of this webinar. And so we've compiled a list of the most major changes that we think will be of interest to the prairie producers specifically. And so if you have, there's lots of other areas in the standard. So if you have any other specific interests, please review the full documents yourself. So when you have a comment, in order to submit your comments, you have to go to the same page on the OFC website, and again, under the Organic Standard Review tab. And there you'll find 2 forms. One is for commenting on the general principles and management standards, and the other is for commenting on the list of permitted substances. So each comment must be sufficiently detailed to be considered, and you can identify your type of comment according to 3 categories. There are general comments. This is you're commenting based on your opinion or your view on a change. There are technical comments where you're basing your comment on data, scientific sources, or a technical evaluation. And editorial comments where you're just suggesting rewording or correcting an error, but you're not actually changing the intent of the standard. And please do submit comments. The standards are complicated enough that it's entirely possible that we have not considered something to date, and your comment could be really useful. So during the last standards review, there were more than 700 comments analyzed by the working group chairs and the technical committee. Every comment received is evaluated, and your comments could lead to a change. So for example, a proposed amendment that proves difficult to implement could be withdrawn from the 2025 draft, or it might be something your comment might not have been previously considered by the working groups or the technical committee. So once the groups have gone through and considered all the comments again, the technical committee will vote on the draft. And if the majority of the technical committee members approve the draft, the 2025 Canadian Organic Standard will be published in December of 2025. And then all the operators in Canada, well, all the operators that adhere to the Canadian Organic Standard will then have 1 year to comply with the new clauses introduced in the 2025 standards. So just a word about the webinar today. We're going to have Allison and Janine present the details of the standard, and then we're going to have Q&A at the end of the webinar. If you have questions along the way, you're welcome to type them into the chat, but you won't be able to unmute yourself during the presentation. We'll do our best to get to as many of the questions in the chat as possible. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll go into a Q&A. We're hoping to have about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. And at that point in the Q&A, you'll be able to unmute yourselves and ask questions too, if it's easier than asking questions in the chat. So with that, I'll pass it back to, I guess I'll introduce Allison. And she'll be talking about the major changes to the crops section.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. Yeah, so I was on the working group for crops, and so I'm going to do my best to take you through some of the major changes that I think and the EDs here think are most applicable to farms out here in the prairies. So we'll start with a change under the record keeping organic plan section, so section 4.4. And if you're able to download the track change document from the OFC website as we go through, I think that would be really helpful because in there is the exact wording changes. So you can see exactly what is being proposed to be changed. But basically what we want to highlight here with 4.4 is actually the biggest changes around the wording for 4.4.1, which actually requires unique identifiers or log codes to accompany every shipment or consumer ready retail sized products that you're moving off your farm. And this is just to increase the traceability along the supply chain. So what does that mean for prairie crop farmers that most of us sell our product in bulk? It just means the bill of lading you'll need to make sure, if you don't already, put your lot number on there so that accompanies your shipment, and that is going to be enough for bulk shipments to meet this requirement. The next one we want to highlight is the 5.1.3, which is the conversion of native species land to organic production. And this one is a really interesting one. What we're proposing here is that any land used for organic production, if it's been cleared or otherwise converted to agricultural purposes from natural ecosystems, so these are ecosystems that are defined to be dominated by indigenous or native plant species. They have some examples here. So if you're in the northern part of the prairies, you're going to be looking at any forest areas. And down where I am in the very southern dry part, we're looking at native prairie. So if I wanted to go out and, heaven forbid, break up a quarter section of my native prairie, I would need to wait 5 years before I can incorporate that into my organic plan. So this is meant to bring us into a compliance with other international standards around converting sensitive ecozones to agricultural production. And so the next one on the list is 5.1.8, and this is alternating between organic and non-organic production. So alternating between organic and non-organic production on your plan has always been prohibited by the standards. What is being proposed here is an exception to that rule under extraordinary circumstances. So for catastrophic or uncontrollable factors, an example here in the prairies would be especially in Saskatchewan, where we have the Weed Act here. If a weed inspector decides that they're going to come onto your property and spray out your field, then there is an exception where if that happens to you and you can prove it to your certifier, you're not going to be dinged for that. And you still have to wait for the 36-month transition period before regaining organic status, obviously. And if you don't give prior notice to your certifier that this is happening, then the land would then be eligible to regain organic status in 5 years. So it definitely pays to keep your certifier in the loop on that. Now, the biggest change that I've actually had the most comments from producers in the prairies is this next one about tree defense posts. So 5.2.3b, tree defense posts. So prior to this, this revision, tree defense posts were prohibited on any organic farm anywhere. For the prairie context, this proved challenging for producers because of supply issues. There really isn't a whole lot of alternatives to tree defense posts out here. And so there was a petition submitted that swayed the working group and technical committee to allow tree defense posts under certain circumstances. So for organic crop production, that means that you are allowed to have tree defense posts form the perimeter of your fields as long as they don't come in contact with organic crops. So you need to have them a little bit of ways from your cultivated area so that there's no roots touching the tree defense posts. If you have organic livestock, there's a different change related to tree defense posts, and you'll have to see a different section, 6.7.8. But essentially what that exception is that you are allowed also around the perimeter of your pasture land, but only if it's required by law. And there are fencing laws in most provinces that will accommodate that. So obviously the intent here is that you want to search for alternatives first. You know, tree defense posts should not be your go-to solution for perimeter fencing, but if you can show with a search and with availability that you can't feasibly do that, then you can have an exemption. Okay, the next one is 5.2.4 biodiversity measures. So this is a really interesting one as well. It's because we want to obviously put some wording into the standards that reiterates the fact that organic production supports biodiversity and healthy ecosystems alongside agricultural systems. And so what it is a list of measures that you can put on your farm to increase the biodiversity. And this list was kind of always there, but now it's been expanded. The wording is more prescriptive. And I'll see if I can go and find it in the track change documents, the exact wording. So some of the examples here, so this is in addition to the practices you're already doing on your farm, such as cover cropping, green manure, and a diversified crop rotation. You can also introduce things such as agroforestry, biomass plantings, grass waterways is a really great one. Pollinator habitats. So if you want to seed your buffer strips to pollinator habitat, that would be applicable here. Additional wildlife habitat that you're protecting. Lots of us especially in our yard sites, have areas that are treed in or something like that where it's protected areas for wildlife. Tree and shrub establishment, which would be a great thing for us northern farmers that have rain and organic matter. Vegetative barriers and field borders, windbreaks, shelter belts, things like that. So lots of these things are already happening on farms. We just wanted to actually put the list in the standards and encourage farmers to really identify those and keep those going on the farm. So the next one here is non-organic seed from transitional land and buffer zones, so 5.3.2. And what we're looking at here is if you've got buffer zones or transitional land on your farm that you're moving into organic production, technically any seed that you plant, that you harvest from those areas is non-organic. What we wanted to do here is allow farmers to start using more of their own seed production within the farm, right? And that has always been a goal of the standards. And so what we're allowing here is, even though the seed is non-organic, you can use it on your traditional, on your organic land without the use of a seed search. So that's always a bonus here. So if you harvest it and keep it for seed, that's a-okay. The next one, non-organic perennial planting stock, and I'll confess that this one doesn't necessarily apply to large crop scale farmers, but what it does apply to especially is for greenhouse or strawberry growers, things like that, where Before, there was lots of confusion on whether or not you can use certain types of planting stock and then harvest them and call them organic within a 12-month period. So this is a huge deal at the Standards Interpretation Committee level. We have spent a lot of time answering questions about what is considered perennial planting stock and if it's organic or not organic. And basically what the summary is now we wanted to ensure that there's a clear distinction between planting stock and seedlings and transplants. Seedlings and transplants are in actual soil, and planting stock is bare root. And so for bare root, for example, strawberries, if they're bare roots, if they are untreated, they can be used and will be considered organic within 12 months if you harvest fruit off of them within 12 months. However, if the original stock that you're using contains soil, is within soil, then they need to be under organics management for at least 12 months before you can harvest them and call them organic. So it allows that 12-month waiting period before you can harvest any fruit off of there and call it organic. And that is the main difference here. So it provides clarity at this point. Yes, 5.4.2a, diversify crop rotations. This one is actually a major change for prairie producers, and I'm happy we're including it here. What it does is it specifies certain restrictions around crop rotations. So what it's looking at is trying to get producers to diversify their crop rotations more. So the exact wording here that they're proposing is crop rotations or sequences that are diversified, including plow-down crops, legumes, catch crops, and deep-rooting plants. 2, cover crops to prevent erosion. And 3, no more than 2 consecutive years of the same annual crop species when it's planted and intended for sale. So at this point, this change would mean that if you're planting like 3 years in a row of wheat, for example, and you're harvesting them every year for sale, I should say, then that would be prohibited. But if you're using something like a cover crop year over year, that's okay. We think it's going to require a little bit of clarity at the SIC level. I'm sure we're going to be answering a few questions about this. But if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. We'll record them, and also any clarity we can provide here, we'll try to do so. The next change we want to talk about is 5.4.5, which is recording your tillage events and the idea of responsible tillage. I'm going the wrong way here. Here we are. So all this is we wanted to make sure that in your chronological log or somewhere else in your record keeping process, you're actually recording your tillage events, and you're aiming to reduce the frequency and intensity of your tillage. So only using the tillage that you need to in order to perform the operation that you're trying to do, like a weed kill, for example. That you're not doing excessive amounts of tillage over and over again for no reason, which I'm assuming most of you wouldn't be doing because that's not how we create good soil. But now we're putting it in the standards so that it's going to be recognized nationally that we do that as a sector. So all you have to do here is just make sure you're recording in your chronological log that such and such a day we tilled this for seedbed prep, and you should be good to go for that. Okay, do we want to pause here for questions on crops, or do we want to go into livestock?
I think we'll just keep going, but people are welcome to type them into the chat at any time, and then yeah, we'll come back to them.
Okay, awesome. Okay, livestock production. Full disclosure, I was not on the livestock working group. Cody and I are just starting to transition our herd to organic production, so I'm slowly learning all of the things that I don't know about that area, but I'm very happy to take you through this process here today. I hope that we'll get a lot of discussion and questions in these areas too, to make sure that prairie producers understand the changes and that they're applicable and able to be incorporated into our systems out here. So the first one we're going to talk about is the grazing season and graze forage. This change is basically looking at making sure that a good portion of the diet of a ruminant animal is based around forage, graze forage intake. Now, lots of us will have our cows on pasture for the majority of the grazing season anyway, so maybe this isn't as big of a change for us, but I still think it's important to note that the changes will require the recording, the timing, and other details of the grazing. So this will change how you document your pasture management plan. So we need to know precisely when the grazing is happening, how many animals are being grazed and what size of paddock, and what dates you put them in, what dates you take them off. And that way, if there's any question about whether or not you're meeting that 30% forage intake threshold during the grazing season, you have all of that proof there to demonstrate that you are. And you can see on the bottom of the slide here, there's lots of rationale. A lot of it's based, pardon me, a lot of it's based on on dairy production, and that's okay. But I still think it's important that that us beef producers out here, if you are making sure that you're documenting it as much as possible. Next is the monitoring of animals. So 6.1.7, and this is a new clause, and it's basically ensuring that as producers, we're monitoring our animals regularly, and we're referencing animal welfare codes when doing so. So we're talking about how frequent you need to record, how frequently you're checking your animals, the type of monitoring that you're doing, and whether or not it's done by a qualified person. Let's see if I can pull that up. (6.1.7). So what that says here is the health and welfare of organic livestock shall be monitored, as well as their housing, feeding, watering, and fencing systems at the frequency required in the applicable code of practice or equivalent superseding welfare program. So there's several available online for free that you can check out. Where the code of practice or equivalent programs do not regularly require daily checks, at a minimum, all confined livestock, so those that are not on pasture or not on rangeland, are considered confined, and they need to, and if they're relying on mechanical feed or water source, they need to be monitored at least once daily. So in your chronological log, if you're going out to check your cows on pasture, just make a note in there that you've been in there to check them, and you should be good. In terms of the origin of livestock and livestock products, 6.2, this was greatly reorganized. It's nothing new, but it's a total reorganization of the section and a clarity around the existing requirements. So, and they also added livestock products to that section as well. So 6.2.1.3 is search for organic breeding stock. And the reason why this was edited slightly is that there's now a new requirement for a documented search of commercially available organic breeding stock before non-organic breeding stock can be brought into the operation. And this, they reasoned, is similar to the requirements for purchasing non-organic seed and organic crop production, right? And the reason why they're doing this is the same reason why we do it in crop production, is they really want to emphasize producing sufficient replacement stock within the operation. So the more that you can keep your replacement heifers, for example, within your own herd, they definitely want to encourage that versus outsourcing. So that's the point of clarity around that. The next one is an allowance for transitional feed, 6.3.4. Again, there's a slight change to this, where pasture and forage that is produced on the operation in the final 12 months of transition may be consumed by livestock in the same production unit. So again, the rationale for this is that there's a new allowance for transitional feed produced in the same operation, so we wanted to be consistent with that. Previously, there was a lack of clarity around this, and we had a bunch of questions at a SIC level about this. So this is basically to address all of those issues. 6.4.4 is a relationship with a qualified expert. So this is a brand new clause that we'll find interesting. Producers shall maintain a relationship with a qualified expert or registered professional. such as an agrologist, nutritionist, or experienced peer who can assess with nutritional needs of animals. And this is a result of some changes around the requirements for forage fiber length in the diet of animals. And again, in our context out here in the prairies, where we do a lot of grazing on pasture, not so much an issue. Our fiber length situation is well within the limits. Again, this is mostly because the fiber length issue was changed mostly due to silage feeding elsewhere in Canada. But what it does mean is that you should have documented somewhere or noted somewhere that you do have some sort of expert that you can consult if you do have issues with your feeding regime, and if you want to double check that you're feeding enough fiber and minerals to your animals. When I look at this for my herd, what I'm thinking is, there's lots of government here in Saskatchewan, for example. The ministry has lots of resources there that you can access for free to help with your nutritional needs for your cattle. Also, your vet would be a qualified expert. Any kind of forage groups like SaskOrganics has expertise as well. So there's lots of options to meet this requirement. And I don't see any real concerns on the prairie side with this one. We skipped that one. 6.5, transport and handling. Summary changes. There's been a number of changes in addition to the whole section just to minimize stress. So the main changes that are interesting to organic producers are actually 6.5.7, and it's the use of electric prods. We used to not be able to use them at all. That used to be prohibited. Now they may be used in some exceptions. And you must document when you do use them and come up with a plan to stop using them. So let me just go down to where those track changes are. I think it's 6.5. Yeah. So electric prods are not completely prohibited because in rare circumstances, they may be needed for human and animal safety. So for example, if you're moving your cattle and one of them drops in the chute and you need to be able to get it up so they don't get trampled, you're able to use electric prods, such things in that sort of situation. But you do, like I said, need to have a plan in the future. Maybe you need to rejig how you're setting up your chute or how you're loading your cattle to make sure that you don't need to keep using an electric prod every single time. Okay, the next, hopefully I'm still within time. The next, the next one. So what is this? Same thing. So if you go through 6.5 and make sure you read all those different areas there, I think I've read through them all. I'm not feeling like they're going to be a huge difference to prairie producers here, but I'd be welcome to hear your feedback on those. In terms of sorry.
I was just going to say we're basically bowing to the federal.
Yes.
The federal standards have increased, so we don't need to be quite as concerned.
Thank you, Janine. That's great. Yeah, there is a new federal regulation that's just coming into effect. And so that does change the standards for livestock transportation across Canada. So that's a big reason for the change. You're absolutely right. So 6.6G, healthcare monitoring and body score. Basically, we want to, again, go back to the defined code of practice to monitor body score and document any corrective actions that you take to when you notice that the body score has dropped to unacceptable levels. So this change will require the operator to take action if the animals are too thin. Organic animals should have superior welfare, and a good body condition is an indicator of good health and welfare. So that's pretty self-explanatory. The 6.6G is another new addition, and again, it's requiring producers to have a relationship with a qualified expert. So this one is around the health and welfare versus the nutritional needs of cattle, related obviously, but different sections. So this is also going to require maintaining a relationship with a qualified expert or registered professional. Lots of examples here. Again, I go back to I have my vet on call here that I can put down as my qualified expert. An experienced peer or mentor, an expert at provincial health center. And so there's lots of options for us in the prairies of people we can access and use as qualified experts. It's just to ensure, especially new and emerging producers or producers that are transitioning into cattle, have the network around them that they need to be successful. Physical alteration. So this section has been reorganized a lot and made much clearer. There are a few changes that I think are relevant to cattle producers here in the prairies, but lots of them now, dehorning is prohibited by producers, only allowed to use under veterinary supervision and at the request of a veterinarian. Branding is now prohibited unless required by law, and in that situation, only freeze branding may be used. There's lots of age limits and specific methods for castration, debudding, things like that. In case of beak treatments, I don't know very much about poultry production, but beak treatment is by infrared at 1 day old is permitted. Otherwise, beak trimming is only permitted in exceptional circumstances. So this is a whole thing again around making sure our standards are superior standards for animal health and welfare, and that we are not behind any of the federal standards, that we're at least keeping up with them. So it was reviewed to ensure it was up to date with the latest research, the latest codes of practice, and consistent with animal welfare goals of organic production. And that's it for me. I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Alison. That was great. Great job. Great summary. We're gonna just move on here. Tracy's gonna talk to us very briefly about some of the changes in apiculture and a whole new section on insect farming.
Thanks, Deb. Yeah, this section will be really fast. It's only one slide. So there's one major change to apiculture that I think has been kind of a long time coming. In the 2020 Canadian Organic Standard, non-organic, non-GMO sugar is allowed to be fed to bees during the winter. And after much discussion in this revision round, we determined that non-organic, non-GMO sugar is not permitted in any other country's organic standard. And so to bring us more into alignment with other countries, we're going to introduce this new requirement that a minimum of 5% of hives under organic management need to be fed exclusively with either organic honey or organic sugar during the winter months. And so the rationale behind this is that we're gradually phasing out the use of non-organic, non-GMO sugar, but we want beekeepers to experiment with it first to observe its impact across the country in all the different climatic zones of Canada, and in order to give people a chance to develop new supply chains for organic sugar coming into Canada, because there were some concerns about that. So the approach that we decided to take is phasing in the exclusive use of organic honey and organic sugar by requiring 5% of hives be fed that way, and then we'll reevaluate in 2030. And then the second big sort of entomological change to the Canadian Organic Standard is we've added an entirely new section that covers organic insects. And so this is to address the growing trend that like insect farming is a thing. And so this is covering just all terrestrial invertebrates and snails. So it's a whole new section similar to the livestock section. And not that many producers are working in this field right now. And so I think it's an opportunity for everybody to review the section and see how you feel about it, and provide input into it. So that's all we had to say on the insects, on the bugs. And with that, I think we're going over to Deb.
Yeah, I'm just going to pass it right off to Janine here. So thanks, Tracy. And yeah, so Janine Gibson's going to go over some of the major changes to the inputs or the PSL, permitted substance list. So over to you, Janine. Thank you.
I'm freezing again, so I'm going to have to keep my camera off, I think. Sorry about that. So
No problem.
substances added for crop production. We've added, you'll see a list here. We have allowed slightly broader needs given we've got some severe weather impacts happening across the prairies. So we wanted our operators to have substances that could be supportive. That was of our function in ensuring that we keep the standards high, but not so high we drive producers out of being able to meet the needs for their crop production. So I was pleased to serve on this. You can see we've added things like ozonated water as a crop protectant, the salicylic acids, including potassium, sodium salts, that's quite new. And of course, the struvite from municipal wastewater. The others, we've always allowed micronutrients, the cobalt. We are trying to support more coconut coir. It's much more environmentally sustainable, even though it comes from so far away, than the peat that we are mining on the prairies. I really believe at some point organic standards should not allow peat moss because it's so destructive. There's no rehabilitating a peat bog once it's been mined. So those are some of the ones that jump to my mind. So providing more options that are aligned with our standards and the latest science, given that our operators are functioning under extreme weather conditions and need a little bit more support. Okay, next slide, please. I'll also mention that I spoke on the livestock because I have served on this technical committee and on the working group since 1999. And it was only because of my own workload that I couldn't also serve on the livestock. I've served on the livestock consistently for many years in developing this standard. But I really wanted to focus on this because I know the alkalinity of our prairies really interferes with absorption of phosphorus. And I've had so many prairie farmers tell me over the years that their options were not enough, that I really wanted to look at improving and increasing our recycling. And so we have got an allowance for recycled municipal wastewater to make it very clear we're not touching the sewage sludge. This is a water recycling issue. So the municipal wastewater that's gone, usually it's the tertiary, it's gone through 3 different cycles of cleaning and it's ready to be released into the environment. But some facilities then can use a process that creates a pure struvite that rather than the phosphorus building up in the pipes, that it can be treated in such a way that it precipitates out without any contaminants. So I just want to say this is allowed in Europe and that the standards that we put in place with our permitted substance list exceeds the purity standards in Europe. So I'm going to just leave it there and say happy to discuss this more and answer any questions. But sincerely spent a great deal of time, the whole committee and myself, researching because we did not want to allow anything that could possibly contaminate prairie soils. And we sincerely believe this will be a change that increases production on the prairies, especially because it's so supportive of alfalfa. And alfalfa plays such a key role in our crop rotations on the prairies. And the farms that were having a problem were seeing that their alfalfa was just not growing. And with the low phosphorus, the weak link of the alfalfa in the organic rotation really needed support. And we believe this addition of municipal wastewater struvite will provide that support needed. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, guana has been removed and really it's negative consequences for using guana. There's toxic metals that can accumulate. It's brought in from far and when it's allowed, I mean, from my understanding, it does not permit guana to be allowed in Canada as a fertilizer. So it just clarifies it that we don't want to use something that is potentially non-renewable and could have fungal or pathogen issues. So we also organize the micronutrients, which are listed individually rather than all grouped together. We clarified sodium nitrate so that any kind is not being permitted. And rock phosphate treated with acid is not permitted. So that's another change. There were some treatments of rock phosphate trying to make it more available so that farmers wouldn't have to wait 10 years or 12 years for it to biodegrade in the soil. And in some cases, it wasn't. So that's why the acid. Substances added or revised for the livestock production. We did isolated amino acids can be permitted in organic livestock feeds in quantities required to balance their diet. Again, looking at weather issues that can cause feed to be less nutritious than it is in ideal circumstances. Any source of vitamins are now allowed because of their necessity in animal diets. The vitamins that are allowed for use in Canada, of course. And we need to provide more options that both recognize the standards limitations, but look at latest science and negative impacts on the environment. You remember, we have section 10 that we use to evaluate if products can be added, and we did use that exclusively to look at the impacts of what we were allowing. So acids include the following sources. These were substances for food preparation: alginic, citric from fruit and vegetable products produced by microbial fermentation or carbohydrate substances, and lactic acid. Next slide, please. So that's great. I've blasted through that, and we're happy to answer your questions if we're able.
Okay.
Great. We're well ahead of schedule here. Are there any before we, I guess, jump into the Q&A? I was just curious, from any of your perspectives, Nicole or Allison or Janine, are there any other ones notable that you think we missed in terms of highlighting some of the major changes, or?
Not that I've noted.
Okay.
And I've reread it and reread it because I do have farmers asking me these questions all the time. So I don't want to lead them astray. And so far, it's pretty straightforward. I think I just have to say, thank Allison and all those that have worked and
Oh, Janine, I think we lost your audio there for a second.
But we made it through, so not the worst timing.
That's true.
Yes, it's Nicole talking. I think all is clear. I will hire you all for the next review.
Well, that would be great if more people could be paid. It takes a lot of volunteer time.
Mhm.
Can I say a little something here about comments? As farmers, I really feel like it's super important that we submit as many comments as we can, because being on working groups, it's really difficult to try to envision every scenario where these changes will impact an operation. And diversity is important. And so I realize this is one of the crappiest times of the year where you don't want to sit in your office and do paperwork, but I really want to reiterate, it's so important that if there's a change here that you're like, whoop, that's going to really impact my operation in such and such a way, it's super valuable for the working groups to hear that directly from farmers. So please, 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 if you have time to submit comments, that would be really, really helpful.
And I would add to Alison's comment that it is the first time that we prepare a document with track changes and the rationale for each change. Because if you look at the CGSB draft, there's nothing. You read this and whoop, you don't know what is modified. So we took the time. It was quite a work because it is almost 200 pages. For the PSL, for the principles, you see the track changes, they are underlined. When new things are added, it is underlined. When it is removed, it is strike through, and you have the reason why. So if you don't agree, you are the farmers. There is no organic production if we don't have farmers and producers, and you must look at this because it affects your work, your daily work, and we need feedback from the producers. Because in organic, you can dream of nice things, and there are principles, but we need to know how to apply the principles in a feasible and pragmatic way. Thank you.
Deb, this is Jim Robbins. I just wanted to reiterate the point that Allison made about making comments if you see something that doesn't fit with your operation. Every time we published a new standard, and we do that every 5 years, we often have people coming back after the new standard is published saying, "Oh, you're requiring me to do something that's impossible or that should be allowed." And that's just because people haven't gone through the changes before the final version is published, which you need to do because sometimes there are things that are missed. And it's not intentionally missed. It's a big process with many people involved, but sometimes things fall through the cracks. And it's really important that you have a look, compare it to your operation and your practices, and make a comment if you see something that doesn't fit.
Thanks, Tim.
I just wanted to address Royden's comment here. Did you consider the overall principles? Sorry, I've got a chat bubble preventing me from seeing the code. Do you consider the overall principle that making standards more onerous rather than less onerous could possibly reduce the number of areas, number of operators maybe committed to organic agriculture in Canada? That is something that we did consider and we would often discuss. I would be curious, Royden, if you think there are specific aspects of this that are making it more onerous, keeping in mind what Jim just said. I'd be curious to hear what those areas are, for sure.
Would you like me to speak to that?
I'd like to hear your
Yes.
feedback.
No, well, it was more, I was actually pleased that in some areas you've added flexibility. And then, and maybe my question is, so you have highlighted some changes. I guess there's many more changes that will be in the fine print. And I was just curious about what process you went through to, whether you considered this principle at all. So I have no specific concern, I think.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering about your operating principle on this.
Yeah,
Because, yeah, and I should say, because my concern arises from observing, at least in Manitoba, that we've had quite a reduction in organic acres. And I mean acres, not areas. That was a typo. And so how do we encourage an expansion of organic acreages rather than a reduction of them?
Well,
And
it
so I
would be
think
great if we could have subsidies like exist in all our trading partners, which subsidize certification costs. That would be a starting point right there.
And Royden, if I could just say, so when we were in the technical committee, and obviously Nicole knows much more about this than I do, we said in the introduction, there were kind of 5 questions that we were using as a barometer all the time when we were looking at the proposed changes. And that was whether the change reflects the organic principle, does it incorporate the most up-to-date research, how does it affect like our international relationships with trading partners, is the proposed text clear and easy to understand, and then also is it realistic and feasible for farmers, processors, and then also inspectors coming out and inspecting on farms. Like, is this a requirement that is actually inspectable? And so those conversations did definitely happen. As an example, that's why we have an experienced peer as someone in your network that can be used for, in place of a vet or a government expert, out of recognition that in some areas, having access to a knowledgeable person on organic livestock production, the only person you might have access to is a peer. And so that's an example right there of where we were trying to make it more accessible to follow.
I
don't know
think
if anyone
too,
else.
another one that also, from my experience, makes it more accessible is the allowance of treated fence posts. Over the years, I received a few calls from people that were interested in transitioning, and they were asking if that was really a requirement, and then they said that that was kind of a deal breaker for them. So I think that's also adds to the accessibility of it.
I have one comment to make to that. The the uh, the standard, of course, is very detailed, and I don't think it's ever been required of producers that they know chapter and verse in that amount of detail. On our farm, we've often just operated on a principle, and the principle is if it's natural, we can use it. If you have a question about whether it's natural or not, then you check with your certifier. If for sure it's not widely conceived as natural, then for sure you check with your certifier before you use it. And operating on that general principle, we've never run afoul. We've never run afoul of our certifier.
Yes, checking with the certifier is always very important before using an ingredient. And I would just also like to say to those gathered here that this process is incredibly time and labor and knowledge intensive, but you learn so much from it. So if any of you want to learn about the standard, please consider joining one of the working groups, because it is I think people don't understand the amount of time and volunteer effort that goes into these working groups and this standard, and generally they're only able to recompensate the chairs of the committees, because so much time is required by the chairs. And having rotated through almost all of these roles in the past, what, I don't know how many years it's been since 99, that it's not, we're having difficulty finding people who can put in the amount of time that's required. So if you know of folks from the prairies, it's very important to have producers' voices listed. Those of us and auditors, inspectors who work with producers can hear from them and represent them as best we can. I mean, I'm a grower myself on a very small scale, but it's important to have the turnover. So be prepared to encourage people for the next round, 2030. Because it starts before that.
If I may add to Janine's comment, when we we had 13 working groups and task forces. And when we launched a call to populate these groups, we ensured that we had producers in all the working groups, so that it is not, a theoretical review. We need producers, so we ensured that we had producers on the working groups. There were 175 two-hour meetings held since November 2023. So all the meetings are recorded. So if you want a long podcast of 350 hours to listen to, I can build a podcast with all the recordings of the working groups. But and about the cost, because we have producers, we can ensure that it is feasible, but the cost is not a perfect limit. It is an argument, but it is not the argument that dominates the conversations. It is rather the principles, because if you want, we want the organic brand, if you call it brand, to be trusted, and if we compromise too much, the market will suffer. Consumers need to understand that the organic principles are, are respected when we do the review.
As a first-time person on the voting committee, I found this very, very educational to see what was going on. And it was kind of just about mind-altering to see the amount of effort and work that went into these things. So I think for someone to come onto this is an amazing opportunity.
Thanks, Martin. So I think as people stick around if you have any questions, but our closing remarks is really hammering in. The deadline to submit your comments is July 29th. So you have the rest of this month to read over these changes. If there's an operation on your farm or a producer you know that might be impacted, you can control find through these documents. Nicole, thank you for the tracked changes this year. That has been monumental in being able to understand what's been changed. It is much easier to read and digest. It's the best way to figure out is this, and if the phrasing doesn't make sense, if you go, I don't know if this is going to affect my operation, please submit a comment. That's how we can highlight that these phrasings might not be perfect and they need to be modified, but we don't know unless that's submitted. And on a final note, we talked about some of the cost and the labor and stuff, but also OFC is a not-for-profit organization that has to match all of the dollars of federal funding that's provided for the standard review from other sources. So if you are in a position and interested in supporting the standard review financially, please visit the OFC website to see more of how you can contribute and support this huge initiative that happens every 5 years. It's not free. And it's not given the support that it really should be. So we're still having to fundraise for a lot of that work. Allison put in the chat both the links to the track changes document. One is for general changes and the other is for the permit and sepsis list in particular. So again, if there's any questions you have for your operation, please look through this. And we'll stick around for extra minutes if anyone else has other questions. But if you have answered yours and you're ready to go, thank you for coming today and being part of this really important part of our sector.
While we still have time here, I was curious for those of you that were involved in the struvite discussion, for those producers on the prairies, in terms of commercial availability and what are their options if this does become, if this is approved and allowed in the new published standard?
They should research Astara. Astara uses technology developed as a company that uses technology developed at the University of British Columbia. So this is a Canadian technology that is still funded. The money goes from Astara, a certain percentage back to support the UBC. So yes, so that's a company. That's where you can access crystal green pearl, which is the recycled. It's also available in generated, which is not a recycled product. So you have to be careful that it's the pearl that meets the purity standards and is the recycled product. So that's where that's available.
There is that company that Janine just mentioned has set up a plant in Saskatoon. So there is product available. Apparently it's in short supply. So you might want to think about contacting them and seeing what supply is available.
They also have a facility in Edmonton. Because that's why we could only get livestock sources allowed in the 2020 review, because none of the research was Canadian. So they had 13 plants around the world in the US and in Europe, and the Europe plants. But then the concern in 2020 was that we didn't have any Canadian research. So then.
Oh, Janine, you cut out again.
But I would say if you check the organic science cluster, there are research activities with the use of struvite at the University of Manitoba. It is driven by Dr. Thiessen Martens. It's the second round of research. There was research with the use of struvite in cluster 3, and now it is continued in cluster 4 at the University of Manitoba.
Okay. Thanks, Nicole. I was also curious, I know there was a discussion, particularly around struvite and the different equivalency agreements. I know it's approved in Europe. I was just curious about some of the other equivalency agreements we have.
Not approved in the United States yet. So we would have to check. So if a producer is selling crops to the US, maybe it could be an impediment and an obstacle. So once the standards are published, we will check, verify equivalency for each of them, because when there is a change to the standards, we have to review equivalency with other countries. But as you said very well, it is allowed in the EU, but not in the US for the moment.
Okay.
And those are, Nicole, those are the two equivalencies that we're most concerned with. Are there any other equivalencies around that we would ever look at or consider?
Yeah, we for all the petitions, we had the technical reviewer who was checking equivalency with the Swiss, the Japanese standard, with the Mexican standard. So we had a list of all that we would compare with all the jurisdictions with whom Canada is trading. So yeah, the German and yeah, we have a long list. All of it is done because the review process is supervised by the Canadian General Standards Board, and in their policies and procedures, they insist on checking on changes that would impede trade. It is one of the requirement that one of the policies of the things that we have to verify all the time.
I'd like to respond. Thank you, Nicole. I'd like to respond briefly to the question in the chat about we need to educate the conventional agriculture market, like help industrial agriculture understand that we are not just changing inputs, but that we have a foundation of health, ecology, fairness, and care that underline every clause that we make, that I don't believe industrial agriculture has. Yes, we would do far more education if we had the money. But government does not fund that kind of education. Canadian organic growers, which used to supervise the standard before we were able to get the Organic Federation of Canada running, has been trying to educate both agriculture and consumers on the benefits of organic methods and organic production. But they're very sensitive to criticizing the industrial agriculture, which you have to see political policies have supported monocropping and have supported large scale. So we are functioning from a place where the small local agriculture, where the farmer's footsteps are the best treatment for the field, is not given respect. So until we have increased funding to reach out and educate, we're talking to those who have an interest. You know, you've got to speak to those who are already interested in our basic values of reducing inputs and even a value of sustainability. And then the net return per acre in organic is higher. And so, yes, you can get higher yields in using industrial agriculture, but the net return in organic is consistently higher because of working with nature rather than trying to dominate it chemically. So I agree with you that needs to be done. It's just extremely challenging in the current world that we're living and working in.
Perhaps it's worth noting that nationally here in Canada, the three national organic organizations, the OFC, Canadian Organic Growers, and CODA, the Canadian Organic Trade Association, are working together in an umbrella organization and putting forward to government the proposition that government needs to move from strictly a regulatory function in organics to a developmental function in organics. So we're asking the federal government to actually think about developing the organic sector rather than simply regulating it.
Hear, hear. So needed.
It's Marion, and it's just in answer to your statement there, also Janine, and in response to my statement. My comment is coming from comments through supportive advocacy groups such as APAS and other similar groups across. And it may be easier than we think if we work through CFA and through these support organizations, as opposed to thinking we need to approach each farmer individually. And I think if we can get a broader informative line going to them, so they're not believing phony baloney information, but have some accurate information. And I'm not talking about a great big marketing campaign so much as working with these advocacy groups so that they can then address the negatives that come up, unfortunately, through lack of information. That's kind of where this was coming through. And I realize I'm off topic from what this whole meeting is about, but I find it also unfortunate that we only have 28 people, including the committee, who took the time to come on to the meeting today to inform themselves as organic producers of what the changes are. And yes, I know it's haying season and it's summer and all the rest of it, but it's still unfortunate that we haven't gotten more buy-in to this, because you guys have put so much work and effort into it, and I think an exceptional job of reviewing things and making it clear. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marion. You've been such a pioneer in this field. My goodness, woman. You've been preaching this for many, many years. Thank you so much for your activism.
Thanks, Janine.
We did have a question come into the chat here. Did you consider permitting farmers to use organic insecticides or other substances that are not registered in the US, or that are registered in the US but not in Canada? One example is the substance in trust, which I gather a substance permitted by the US standards on alfalfa seed but not in Canada. Given our proximity to the US, does it make sense that we blend our certification processes? Now, I thought Entrust was one that was allowed in Canada.
What is it made of? I have to check. Because we don't, Trust is a brand. We don't allow brand. We don't assess brands. We assess the substance.
The chemical substances. Okay. Yeah.
I think it's a BT variety. It's a BT variety. I just will say to people, we have issues with the Pesticide Material Review Agency in what we're allowed to use.
And I'll also jump in here and say that, petitions have to be submitted for changes to the standards. Working groups are not sitting around developing petitions on our own. If you want to have something permitted that's not already permitted, you need to submit that change, right? So it's not, I think, Nicole, hopefully you'll back me up here. We're not sitting around asking ourselves what else we can do. But so it's, if you have a certain active ingredient that you want to have permitted in the organic standards, you need to submit that change when the standards review occurs.
And I just also like to respond briefly to Royden suggesting we blend our certification processes. My first standards work was representing the International Organic Inspectors Association on the US standard development back in the late 90s. And I saw the influence of big business affecting the standard development. So I strongly supported CGSB's much more democratic oversight of the standards development process. So that is a basic philosophical difference in that we control, I believe we strive to control corporate domination more in Canada than they do in the States. However, the government is lobbied in Canada. The states see organic as a business opportunity. And so most states subsidize certification costs and subsidize aeration of bins. Like I'll see a small farm in Minnesota that has a bin system like it would take 2 sections of a farm in Canada to have. And when I ask them, they say, oh, well, we got a government grant. We paid 1/3, they paid 2/3, but the state doesn't list that as farm subsidies. But that kind of infrastructure supporting farms is not as available in Canada. It's much more geared to large farms and large farming and support on a different basis. So there's lots of issues in the different orientations between the Canadian and the US certification process, Royden. I'd be happy to talk with you more on that outside this call.
Yeah, about Entrust, I see this spinosad. Maybe you should submit your question to the Standard Interpretation Committee, because it is produced from the bacteria. So we would have to check if under microbial products or microbials or microbial products, and this spinosad, I don't know how to pronounce it, would be allowed.
So Just back to that, I know, so we looked into entrust back when everybody in the organic sector on the prairies were just being ravaged by grasshoppers. And my understanding, and I don't want to speak out of turn, was that it had been approved for use. Well, it is approved for use by the PMRA. And my understanding was that one certifier had allowed it because the active ingredient is spinosad, but I mean, yeah, it would definitely be something to check with your certifier with, because it all depends on what the pesticide is approved for, is registered for under the PMRA, and whether your certifier approves it.
And I do think that's an important point that Deb's making there. That we don't really, we being the Canadian Organic Standard and the permitted substances list, it doesn't approve, as they were saying, it doesn't approve a product. It's the certifying body that will look at that specific product and then say if it meets the requirements of the permitted substances list or not. So it's individual certifiers who are ultimately approving specific brands. And so, like Deb just touched on, there might be one certifier that has researched and looked into entrust and said, yes, we'll permit it. And the other certifying bodies, maybe nobody's ever asked them. Maybe they came to a different conclusion. In an ideal world, all the certifying bodies would come to the same conclusions. But my understanding is the research that the different CBs put into permitting specific brands aren't necessarily the same. So sometimes they came to different conclusions. So
yes,
yeah,
but
and then they send the question to the Standards Interpretation Committee. 80% of the questions issued to the Interpretation Committee come from certification bodies. So ultimately, but it depends, because a brand, some CBs, they have an attestation activity. So a brand will pay to get an attestation from a Canadian CB. But it's not mandatory for a brand to have an attestation, to pay to have an attestation from a CB. So if not, then it is the producer who I would suggest, would ask the CB, well, if I use this product, will I use my certification? But it will probably it will probably be submitted to the Interpretation Committee.
I think the consistent oversight of certifiers through the conformity verification bodies has been a bit of an issue too, so that not all the certifiers are, quote, accredited by the same organizations. And so at this level, the International Organic Inspectors Association Canadian Committee has been asking for input to the CFIA quality manual, because there are a lot of decisions that are not in the standard, but that CFIA are making based on their quality manual, which they just reissued and updated without giving the sector any input. So they don't really understand our principles of health, ecology, fairness, and care, yet they're creating their own quality manual of how to supervise us, but with very limited input from the sector. So that's one area that we need to change, because there needs to be more equivalence between the various conformity verification bodies that are overseeing the certifiers. So that's why you have some certifiers approving certain things and other certifiers not approving them, because their certification bodies have different accreditation. And in some of the witness audits that I have been participating in the last few years, CFIA is almost weaponizing the bureaucracy. They're not there. It doesn't appear that they are open and supportive of organic, in that one reviewer was insisting that a box of cabbage 2 feet from an organic racking with packaged organic food was a possible contamination risk. And I said, no, it's in the aisle. It's not in the organic racking. And how can edible cabbage be a contamination risk for packaged organic food? You know, triple packed onions in mesh, in a paper bag, and the 20, 30, 50 pound paper bag in a cardboard box. And she wanted me to write up contamination from edible cabbage that was 2 feet away. So there's problems. There's problems in paradise here, folks, but it's with the structure, not just with the standards. So we continue to work on that, ensuring there's a more even playing field, not just across Canada, but with our major trading partners.
Yes, I would like to add to this. When the CVBs are accrediting the CBs, they are not looking at the decisions of the CBs. It is like if you are a company and you are audited, your auditor will not tell you spend more money here, spend less money here. They audit how you do your accounting. So the CVB checks if the CB functioning method of functioning is good. They audit the process. They don't audit the CB decision as such. So it is how audit works. And the way the system is built is that ultimately in Canada, it is a certification body that is legally responsible for its own decisions. It's not the CVB. So it's why you can have a CB deciding something, okay, it's good. Another CB deciding the contrary, okay, it's good. So, and the CBs are not feeling safe because they feel they have it's not CFIA who has the legal responsibility of the compliance. It is the CB who is the legal ultimate authority by itself and that has to hold to its own decisions. It's the way the system is built. Could be improved for sure. Because CFI, when they created the first organic regulations, they decided not to centralize it because it would be too expensive. They disseminated the authority all around so that they don't have too much work to do. So there were 5 CVBs in 2009, 5, and then now we're down to 2. But it's how CFIA decided to implement the system years ago. Quebec has contested saying, well, you'll have a lot of different decisions from everywhere. But it is what CFIA decided. It was a low-cost system. And finally, just to say that it is the CB is responsible for the job it does legally. Sorry for the bad news.
And then another barrier is that most CBs charge you. If you want to apply to have a product allowed, you have to pay for their time in doing the research to ensure. Because we have a closed positive list, we thought that that would be much more sustainable in the long run to say these are the ingredients we allow, because we can't be monitoring the development of the marketplace. So that then you need the CBs or some other bodies to say, okay, this product has these allowed ingredients, so you can use it. That's not, as Nicole said, the CFIA did not want to play the role of the National Organic Program in the States, where they accredit all the certifiers. So you have the Accredited Certifiers Association of the States, which are coming out with all these best practices for certification, which we don't have in Canada, and which promotes communication between the certifiers, which also helps improve the sector. We don't have anything like that in Canada. So we don't have very good communication between certifiers. And so we have these discrepancies that when you add that to the lack of education nationally on what organic standards mean, you have confusion and people thinking, well, they'll allow anything because this guy says he can use it, but this guy says he can't. So the inconsistency does cause credibility issues across the country, but it's a deep issue.
I'm enjoying this discussion. We have 4 minutes left in our allotted webinar time slot here. I wonder if there's like potential to consider this topic in the future and maybe take some action on it. I think there's lots of stuff here that we can all go away and think about. Who would have thought your question would lead to such a discussion, Royden? So I don't know if there's any more closing thoughts here. I think our take-home message is to go to the OFC website and submit comments on the proposed standards. And I should put a plug in here for the OFC website in general. They have a new website. They also have organic science cluster research going on right now with a ton of amazing resources on there. So if anybody hasn't checked out that website, it's less than a year old anyways, maybe 6 months, 8 months old. And it's a fantastic website now. Probably was before too, but it's great now. So
thank you, Tracy.
yeah.
We're proud of Nicole's good work.
Oh, it's reviews a teamwork. Team and the team and the teamwork again. It's coordinating a teamwork. That is the fun of it.
So you have until July 29th to submit your comments, and all of them will be considered. So I think with that, we'll close out the. Thanks, Denlyn.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for the session.
Yeah, thank you.